Nerd Morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy, and this is the Nerd Morning Show, a show where we celebrate nerd culture by talking about books, video games, comics, and other nerdy things. And today we're talking about book 2 in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan called The Great Hunt. Now, this book was written in 1990, and it is the second book in the series. And so we're going to be going through this and talking about some of the cool elements of this story. It's a massive story, so we cannot cover everything, but there will be spoilers. And I feel like after 30 years, the statute of spoiler limitations has passed. But if you are looking to go through and read this book, I'm going to talk about some of the non-spoilery type stuff at the beginning, and then I will be diving into some more spoiler-filled elements later into the video, and I'll let you guys know. So you can stop there and then come back after you have finished reading the book, which I highly recommend. Okay, so I absolutely love big epic stories, and this series is, including the prequel, like 15 volumes long, and each of the books are pretty substantial. This story is essentially a story about the chosen savior of the world and have him reluctantly choose that path, and how the struggles of being that chosen person would weigh on you as a character. And also, some of the big themes and elements of this series are the rumor mill. Like, because we have a lot of big characters, this is a big cast epic. You have these people in different places in the world, and you hear the same story told in a different way that's been told in a different way, and you kind of see how, like, that telephone game actually expands in real life, and these were like ramifications of this idea totally is something that's applicable to today with the internet and social media, and how a story gets told and then gets retold and then gets retold, and it becomes a totally different story. And this story like explores all of those different ideas, and I find that really interesting. This story here is a story that has two main elements. You've got the boys' side of the story and then the girls' story. You have Nynaeve, Egwene, Elayne. Men are like the main female characters, and many of them can use channeling, which is like the magic, and they're going to learn to develop their abilities by becoming students of the Aes Sedai at the White Tower, and that's a really cool element and part of the story. The other part of the story is that Rand, Mat, and Perrin are going to go off hunting for the Horn of Valere and also the Cursed Dagger to help rescue Mat. And this is like the two main elements, and how this story is like interact with one another, yet being like thousands of miles apart, and then maybe how it gets weaved together tighter towards the end is really amazing. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about the Wheel of Time series. And this, I think, makes it so some people feel like it's a little harder to approach, because it is multiple stories that go on simultaneously in the same world and are told all at once. And so you kind of do hop around, and you might have a favorite, like, I really love Rand's experiences, or I can't stand Rand, I want to have more Mat stories, or I want to see what Nynaeve and Egwene are after and doing right now, like things like that. And for me, I'm just like, give me it all. I want this whole huge big story. And so it really resonates with me. But if it's something that maybe doesn't resonate with everybody, like, no judgments here. Such a big epic story. And the pacing, I think, is, I like it. I think it's good, fast paced, good energy, but ultimately there are a lot of events that happen that are experiential. So they're going and they're doing this thing and they're having an interesting experience that kind of is setting up stuff that happen later, or are doing things that help build character, but you maybe don't necessarily feel are driving the story. And I think I love it. I absolutely love it. But I can see how some people say that throughout the series, the pacing kind of can slow. And maybe we get a little bit of elements of that here. I, again, huge mega fan. This is like my fourth time reading through the series, and I absolutely love the characters. I love seeing how they grow and they change. Particularly in this one, we get to see Rand really wrestle with his destiny, and that's really significant. And then we also get to see Nynaeve and Egwene and Elayne really grow into their power, and that's also really, really cool. Okay, so we're gonna dive into some spoiler stuff here. So this is that point. The big aspects of this story, like this, with the hunt, right? So Rand is going through to find ultimately the dagger. That's his goal. He wants to rescue Mat, who is dying from the curse of the dagger that he stole in Shadar Logoth way back in book 1, and he is following Intar, who is a hero at the beginning, and has been now charged with the quest of recovering the horn, which is at the same place as where the dagger is. And thus, Rand is trying to escape. He's trying to run. He's trying to fight his destiny as much as possible. And going through this quest, we get to see him learn a little bit more how to use his abilities, him getting more and more hints towards him being the Dragon Reborn and being pushed that way. And I find this resistance to be really interesting. And one of the things that a good story needs is conflict, right? You need to have conflict, and you have all this huge internal battle that Rand is having to face as he's being told he is the chosen one, but also that he's going to go mad. But also, being the chosen one is also like being the worst thing ever. And he's having to figure out all of these things and who he is, and that's a big driving element here. I feel like Mat is kind of status quo. He wants the dagger. He needs the dagger. He's trying to survive. Perrin, we get a little bit more from him as we interact with White Cloaks in the area, and him thinking back to the struggles that he had in the first book. So those are some of the big things that we go on with the characters here. And as they go off and try to hunt for the horn and the dagger, one of the big cool moments is when they go to that alternate world that Rand does, and that he has this experience where he meets Lanfear, and him and his few companions that did travel to the alternate world, Loyal and the Sniffer, are really like, they get to experience what if. And one of the things that I think is really interesting here is that it's exploring parallel worlds and alternate realities and things like that, which I find to be something that's like very comic booky. You see in those types of like wheelhouses, but you don't really see in epic fantasy very often. And this is something that we have really played with, though, throughout the series. From the first book to this one, we have these alternate dimensions, the ways and things like that. And here we just explore this, and that gets played off again when they return and try to use the portal stones later, that they actually live a bunch of different other versions of their lives. And this is also kind of paralleled with when Nynaeve goes and gets through the accepted training and has some opportunities to live these other lives, and has to ultimately reject those other, what we would call in this series, other weavings of the pattern. And I think that's another big thing of this, is that we have personal choice, and we also have destiny and a pattern that's being woven, and how we essentially succumb to the patterns of our lives. And I think this honestly is a fascinating commentary on our individualism that we would try to have inside of life. But ultimately, like, unless you're an uber rich individual, you've got certain limitations that the world just kind of forces on you, right? And even then, you got things that force you in certain ways, and we kind of want to be able to have our independence, but ultimately, like, the environment and the world do shape us in great degrees. And this is something I think that is represented in an interesting way with the pattern, which is the wheel that is weaving the pattern of time, and the whole analogy that is built out from the title. With this, we get some really, really cool things to think about, and it's one of the great things about this series. Lanfear, when we meet her, she's going by the name Celine, and she's trying to be this like temptress, love interest for Rand, and he's flummoxed. He's totally blown away. She's extremely beautiful. She's very refined, and it really does flip him around a little bit, where he's like, maybe I'll be a lord to her. Maybe I am trying to prove and be honest, and I'm just a shepherd, and kind of almost in a way kind of pushes him towards some of the lordly type elements that the Dragon Reborn will need to be able to be successful in the future. And so I think that's really an interesting thing that we get to experience there. And when we get back, we ultimately get to Kyrian, and he is trying not to play like the great game, right, with the houses, and there's like, he rejects all the letters, there's that big buzz that he gets, and ultimately it builds his status so much, and I find that absolutely fascinating. One of the best moments here was really meeting Tom Maryland and getting that interaction with him again. Ultimately, him being thrown back into the big game is tragic, and one of the most heart-wrenching moments of this book. On the other side, we get Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elayne learning and developing as they are developing their skills with the magic. And we get Min, who becomes like their friend and is super cool and awesome. And she's an interesting character because she has the ability to see the pattern. So she sees these flashes of symbols and interpretation of what their future is going to hold, which again is that contrast between fate and choice, and that's a big thing throughout the entire story. And I really love to see how they grew, how they changed while they traveled to the White Tower, while they're at the White Tower. But ultimately, their big adventure is nearing almost to the end, really, when one of the sisters is actually an evil person and tries, ultimately tricks them and sells them to the Seanchan, which are the like descendants of Arthur Hawkwing, come back from across the ocean, and they're here to conquer. And one of the major ways they do that is by enslaving the people who have this magical ability, and make them into what they call Dumani, and force them to fight, force them to do. And I think that that's a really fascinating and challenging experience. And Egwene is one that is caught and enslaved, and the rest ultimately are trying to rescue her. Nynaeve and Elayne are like truly escape and are like trying to sneak one their way in and figure a way. And Min ultimately is like a capture, but also now just kind of like a regular servant doing regular things in order to be able to be a companion for Egwene, which is amazing for Min, and she's a fantastic character, and I think that it gets shown here. Egwene is truly traumatized from this. Ultimately, they all meet up together at Tommen Head, where Rand and the girls and all the rest of the guys are at the same place on two separate goals and missions, but it all revolves around the big events that are with the big battle between the White Cloaks and the Seanchan, and then ultimately the big battle where Mat sounds the horn and the heroes of the dead come to like ghost form and battle the Seanchan in a very Return of the King fight way, right, with the heroes that are like reborn. And it's really cool to see Arthur Hawkwing come and be like, okay, Rand, what do you want us to do? And he ultimately has to hoist the dragon flag, and also like declare himself to some degree. as the Dragon Reborn. And he also fights who he thinks is the Dark One, and it's this big epic showdown that like is like parried in the sky, and everyone can see this, and it is a really, really dynamic, big moment, and honestly is super, super cool. I love this story. I think it is very dynamic. Seeing the growth of the characters through this is fantastic, and I am so excited to be going in again and reading book 3 for, like, again, I said, like the 4th time. What are some of your favorite moments in this story? Let me know. Put those in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. You can find more Nerd Morning content at Nerd Morning on places like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you so much again, and we'll catch you guys next time.